Nikki Lowe, and welcome to the Wisdom for Working Mums podcast show, where I share insights and interviews that support women to combine their family, work and life in a more successful and sustainable way. Welcome to this episode. I'm your host, Nikki Lowe, and today I'm talking about rest. More specifically, the 7 types of rest we need as we emerge from this pandemic. Because life has been a lot for us recently. Many of us have just been pushing through the last 12 months. What else can we do, right? There have been few opportunities to rest, recover, replenish and catch our breath. That alone is a huge issue. Also, we're likely to be in a rest deficit. But there's another issue if we're not careful. And if you're anything like me, I used to think recovery was sleep. I couldn't understand when I started to hit my own burnout experience why it was happening. I was getting good quality sleep, so why was I burning out? In reality, I was missing out on the other types of rest I desperately needed. I'd assumed that sleep was rest and that they were the same thing. I'd incorrectly confused the two. There are, in fact, 7 different ways to rest. If we want to feel like we're able to thrive, we need to understand these 7 different ways so that we can rest and create that sense of restoration in our lives. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about why rest is important, the 7 different ways to rest, and some ideas and opportunities to access those 7 different types. But before we dive in, I'd like to do a listener shout out. I'd like to thank you, Just Tins, who left this review. She says, I'm a pregnant working mum with a toddler. So like most of us, I have a few moments where I could do with some help. I've listened to several of Nikki's podcast episodes and have found them to be really insightful with interesting and varied guest speakers covering everything from perfectionism through to advice on flexible working, setting boundaries and how to put self-care higher up on your to-do list. I like to listen to it in the evening while getting ready for bed for a dose of positivity before I zonk out. Thanks, Nikki. Well, thank you, Justins. I'm so happy that this podcast is useful for you and is giving you insights to help you as a mum. I also love that it gives you a dose of positivity, and thank you for choosing to listen. I'm always really aware that there are a million different ways you can spend your precious time and probably a million different podcasts you can listen to as well. And it means the world to me that you choose to listen to this show. So thank you. As I've said before, it can feel like I'm in this little vacuum here in podcast land. I often have no idea who chooses to listen and what impact the episodes have. So if you're listening to this and you've not yet left a review, it would be amazing if you did. You can head over to iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast and you can rate the podcast and leave a review there. Not only does it help me to continue to create more useful content and episodes for you, but it also helps more working mums like you to benefit from the show, because you may have heard me say before, the way that the reviews work, the more reviews you get, the higher in the rankings you get, and it means that more people actually get shown that this show even exists. So now back to rest. There's a really unhelpful expectation, I think, in our culture that if we're doing well in life, we're always in this kind of high positive energy, achieving goals and getting stuff done. And our culture loves high achievers. But the reality is that true high performers are never only in that performance zone, let alone if they're trying to combine work and motherhood in a pandemic. It's just not sustainable to stay in that performance zone. It has to be balanced out by moving into the recovery zone. And there's a brilliant image from a company called the Energy Project. And if you've not come across them, they're brilliant. They're an American organisation that really are changing the way we view our work and how we view energy. And actually, I interviewed one of their European directors on one of my first podcast shows. So if you go back to episode 8, you can listen into that, and it's well worth a listen. But the Energy Project take their research from really high-performing athletes, and then took that work and transferred it into the corporate world and looked at what it takes to sustain success. And they say that true sustainable success comes from moving between two particular zones. And what I'd like you to do is imagine an image, and I'm going to talk you through it. It's always a bit difficult on a podcast trying to describe an image. But if you imagine there's two lines, there's a horizontal line that is all about energy, but we're looking at it positive and negative. So this horizontal line is at one end of the line is negative emotions, and at the other end of that horizontal line is positive emotions. And then you've got a vertical line, and at the top of that vertical line is what we would call high energy, and at the bottom of that vertical line is low energy. And what that does is create these four quadrants. So in the high energy and positive emotions energy, we've got the performance zone, and beneath that, in the kind of low energy but positive, is what we would call the renewal zone. But if you flip that onto the other side, in the high energy but negative is what we would call the survival zone. But in the low energy and negative is the burnout zone. And what the energy projects say is that for true sustainable success, we have to move between that performance and recovery zone. So the performance is high positive energy and the recovery zone is low positive energy. And that balance between the two is where we get kind of success and true sustainable success. But for most of us over the last 12 months, it hasn't given us much opportunity to move into that recovery zone. The truth is that most of us probably weren't getting enough time in that recovery zone before the pandemic hit, let alone during it. We were likely to be in this kind of recovery debt, kind of not having banked enough recovery to balance out the demands of our lives. And that was before March 2020 and this whole pandemic. And when we're in a recovery deficit, we're more likely to move over to that left-hand side of the diagram that I just explained, where we're into kind of a more negative quality of energy. So in the top of that, so in the high negative, is that survival zone. And that is about high energy. And that's more about feeling kind of irritable, frustrated, angry, maybe defensive or anxious. But it can actually mask itself as the performance zone, as it has a similar kind of energetic quality to it. But the survival zone really is fueled by adrenaline and cortisol, which aren't a long-term sustainable energy source. So it's then really easy to slip down into that bottom quadrant of the burnout zone. So that's kind of low energy and negative energy. And here you're likely to feel kind of exhausted, sad, lethargic, and it is extreme, really hopeless and helpless. So what's the answer if you find yourself on that left-hand side in either the survival or the burnout zone? The answer might be slightly different to what you expect. Yes, it's about recovery, but if you're anything like me, I used to think that recovery was sleep. I didn't really understand what it meant to actually recover. So I couldn't understand when I started to hit my burnout experience why it was happening. I was actually getting good quality sleep, so I was kind of like, why am I burning out? I'm getting good sleep. But in reality, I was missing out on the other types of recovery that we need as humans, particularly in the world that we now live in. And there's a lady called Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, and she did this brilliant TED Talk. And if you've not come across TED Talks, I would highly recommend you check them out. There's loads of their 20-minute videos and they're brilliant. And in her TED Talk, Dr. Dalton Smith shared the real reason we're tired and what to do about it. And she highlights these 7 types of rest that we need. And I was missing out on those other types of rest, and I desperately needed them. I'd unhelpfully assumed that sleep and rest were the same thing, and I'd incorrectly confused the two. And if we think about it, most self-care that's spoken about is really about activation. So it's about exercising or taking a trip with friends or going out to dinner. I'm not to say that those aren't good for you. They really nurture you, but they don't necessarily deeply replenish you. And Dr. Dalton Smith argues that we don't understand the true power of rest. And so we're living in a culture of this kind of rest deficit, which she then argues is creating a culture where too many of us are kind of high achieving, high producing, but we're also chronically tired and at risk of burnout. And I remember on my own burnout journey, when I knew that I needed to rest, how much I resisted it and how difficult I found it. And it wasn't until I read a book called Daring to Rest by a lady called Karen Brady that I really started to understand what was going on. And in her book, Karen beautifully explains why rest is difficult and what true rest is. And she also shared something in the book that I'd not come across before, was this concept of something called BRAC, B-R-A-C. And BRAC is your basic rest and activity cycle. And it comes from a pioneering sleep researcher called Nathaniel Kleitman. And he discovered that our bodies typically operate in 90-minute cycles, both when we're asleep and when we're awake. So kind of our sleep pattern tends to be kind of 90 minutes and then we'll come out of it, even if we don't fully wake, before we go back into that deeper sleep. And the same when we're awake, we're able to work and focus for probably about 90 minutes before we need to have a break and some kind of defocusing from whatever we're focusing on. But Karen beautifully describes in her book that so many of us are overriding our BRAC, so our basic rest activity cycle, and it's going against our body's natural rhythms. So we're staying activated and stimulated beyond what's natural for our bodies, and that's when we can get stimulated into that fight and flight, so our sympathetic nervous system gets too triggered. And Dr. Dalton Smith argues that there are, in fact, 7 ways for us to move into that recovery zone, and that if actually we're going to access this performance zone and feel like we're able to be at our best, we need to understand these 7 different ways to create that sense of restoration in our lives and kind of get back into that BRAC cycle that our bodies are designed to be in. So what are the 7 types of rest? Well, the first one is physical rest, and this is the one that's probably most understood in our culture. So even if we're not actually getting enough of it, most of us understand that the quantity of our energy is influenced by our ability to get physical rest. But physical rest can both be passive and active. So passive rest would be sleep and napping, which I think most of us will be aware of that. But active rest is all about restorative activities. So those might be kind of yoga, stretching, hands-on therapy. So that could be a massage, or it could be reflexology. We may not consider how active rest might be useful for us. So if physical rest is something that you need, the kind of opportunities for physical rest might be eating regular nutritious food that physically kind of improves the quantity of our energy, getting good quality sleep, purposely moving our bodies each day. And I talk about movement rather than exercise, and you may have heard me talk about this before. My brilliant friend Beth Gardner, who is a body expert, taught me this principle of working in rather than working out. So doing movement that restores energy in the body, doesn't deplete it. And also taking regular breaks during the day. So going back to that BRAC cycle of knowing that 90-minute cycles is round about what our bodies need. So kind of only working for maximum 90-minute spurts before we kind of take a break. So that's the first type of rest. The second type of rest is mental rest. If you think about it, we've got the never-ending to-do list, the constant unclosed loops in our brains, the never-ending browser tabs left open, both perhaps on our laptops and computers, but also in our minds, the multitasking, the being in mum, work and teacher mode simultaneously and having to switch between those constantly. They're all a huge drain on our mental energy, which really is the focus of our energy. The physical energy is about the quantity. Mental energy is about the focus. So if you find that you're struggling to get to sleep at night or focusing on one task, then there's a good chance that you're in the need of mental rest. So mental rest opportunities could be scheduling short breaks throughout your day and actually taking them. I know I have to be really conscious. I can put them in my diary, but it's really easy for me to override them, thinking, I'll just do one more email, or I'll just get that ticked off my to-do list, and I'll easily override my kind of rests and breaks. It's about monotasking rather than multitasking, and I know how challenging that is, particularly if you've been home schooling while trying to work at home during the pandemic. It's about reducing distractions. Can you turn off your phone and computer notifications? How can you prevent work creep either into evenings or weekends or your holidays? Those would be the kind of opportunities to look at for mental rest. The third type of rest is sensory rest. If you think about it, the bright lights, computer screens, email notifications, social media notifications, whether it be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, the Zoom meetings, your children speaking to you at the same time, the constant needs and requests from others, the clutter building up in your home from having your family living in it 24/7. Just hearing me say that might be raising your nervous system and heightening it. We live in an overstimulated world at the best of times, but the last 12 months, it's easy for our senses to become overwhelmed because it's likely we've not had a sensory break from any of this. So sensory rest opportunities might be just closing your eyes for a minute in the middle of the day, or consciously unplugging from electronics, because the chances are, even when you're in those moments where you would be resting more, perhaps after the children have gone to bed or lying in the bath, the chances are most of us have still got our smartphones with us and are still either scrolling or kind of having notifications pop up. So we're not actually getting the sensory rest, even at those moments that we may be used to getting it. Or creating just intentional moments of sensory deprivation, and that might be whatever it might be for you, sitting with your head under the duvet, but consciously recognizing that where's a place where I can just take a break from all these sensory inputs. The fourth type of rest is creative rest, and if your job requires you to come up with ideas or solve problems, then this type of rest is essential. And, I would say most jobs, that is important. If you're going to come up with ideas or solve problems, that is most work. But when our brains are so focused and we're bombarded with constant distractions, it's really difficult to tap into our creativity. So creative rest supports our ability to learn and adapt. And as the author, Tom Crider, wrote in the New York Times, the space and quiet that idleness provides is a necessary condition for standing back from life and seeing it whole, for making unexpected connections and waiting for the wild summer lightning strikes of inspiration. It is, paradoxically, necessary to get any work done. And I can really relate to this. At the beginning of this year, so in January, me and my husband got COVID, and it literally, I just stepped away from my work and just focused on the bare essentials, which were kind of homeschooling and keeping the children safe and fed. And so I kind of switched off from anything else and created more of a creative rest space. And all this creativity hit me about my work, my whole business plan, my whole strategy. And it was a really great reminder that we need to create space for that stuff to bubble up. So how do you create opportunities for creative rest? A couple of them might be things like changing your work environment. So if you're used to working, I don't know, in the kitchen, can you move to a different room? Just that physical environment change can create a rest from the same stimulus. Or make your kind of working environment more inspiring, maybe using art or images for inspiration. Getting yourself into nature, that's a huge one. Perhaps listening to music, And also trying to connect to a childlike sense of play and wonder. It's really easy to lose connection to that as we grow up and we're in kind of the responsibilities and relentlessness of adulthood. But connecting to that childlike sense of play and wonder can connect us to creative rest. So the fifth type of rest is emotional rest. So if physical rest supports the quantity of our energy, emotional rest supports the quality of our energy. And over the last 12 months, it's likely that your emotions will have had a more negative quality to them. So we talked about that image right at the beginning, that the competing demands of our family and work in a pandemic may have triggered, feelings of worry or irritability, impatience and anxiety. So there's a kind of slightly more, it's classed as negative quality. I would say all emotions have a positive impact or intention, even if they don't have a positive impact. So their intention's always positive, but there might be that what we would call more negative quality to them. So if you've been shouldering the emotional load for your family while also not getting the connection to all the people and all the things that bring you positive emotions, then it's pretty damn likely you're in need of some emotional rest. So emotional rest opportunities might just be being really honest with yourself about how you're feeling. A truthful, I'm not okay, can really help just validate your own emotions. Also be aware of people pleasing. Where and when are you triggered into perhaps emotionally rescuing or trying to please others? And also pay attention to what triggers and drains your emotion. So notice the triggers and the impact. And once you're aware of that, you can focus on either reducing or eliminating the things that are within your control. So hopefully that about emotional rest is useful. And the sixth type of rest is social rest. Although we are by nature social animals, each of us has really a different capacity for social connection. And the pandemic has really impacted our ability to connect in the ways we might need and want. And our capacity for social connection isn't just influenced by where we sit on the extroversion-introversion scale, but it's also influenced by the types and quality of interactions that we have with others. So it can be useful to differentiate between those relationships that kind of replenish and revive us. I'd call those people radiators, just being around them, they radiate energy. For those people that exhaust us, and I call those people drainers, being in their company or in their energy kind of depletes us. So the social rest opportunities are really becoming aware of the people in your life that you find kind of supportive or enthusiastic, kind and easy to be around. And on the other hand, become aware of the people you find really draining or demanding or just exhausting to be with. And where possible, limit the interactions with people who drain you and create more opportunities to be with the people who energise that social kind of energy around you. And the seventh type of rest is spiritual rest. This final type of rest is really the ability to connect and feel a deep sense of belonging, meaning and purpose. It's about leaning into a sense of something larger than yourself. And as I said at the beginning, earlier on, I really found resting difficult. And it's because it's an act of trust to rest. As kind of we step away from the certainty of doing lots of things, and we probably, our self-worth has been linked to getting stuff done, and our productivity. To create some space and quiet can be a little unnerving if we're not used to it. But connecting to a deep sense of meaning and purpose in our lives can then connect us to our human spirit, which has an enormous power of renewal, but actually we very rarely give ourselves the opportunity for that. So some ideas of spiritual rest opportunities might be just taking some time to reflect on your personal values and finding a way to live in more alignment with them. It can be about identifying the things in life that create flow for you. And that flow is kind of where you find yourself in your sweet spot. You kind of feel effective, you're effortlessly absorbed and fulfilled. And if you can find kind of ways of getting into flow and do more of it, or perhaps engaging in meditation, prayer, or a community involvement. So really, this podcast is all about creating a rest revolution. After this pandemic and the last 12 months, if we're going to emerge from this stronger and more wise, we need to recognise that sleep alone can't restore us to the point where we feel completely rested and renewed. So it's vital for us to get the type of rest we need so that we can emerge from this challenging time kind of more stronger and wiser. So I hope this has been useful for you to explore rest, and I'd love to hear from you too. So drop me an email or tag me on social media and let me know. What have you learned from this? What type of rest might you be in need of, and how can you get more of it? Because I love to hear from you. Until next time, take care and thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of Wisdom for Working Mums, please share it on social media and with your friends and family. I'd love to connect with you too. So if you head over to wisdomforworkingmums.co.uk, you'll find a link on how to do this. And if you love the show and really want to support it, please go to iTunes, write a review and subscribe. You'll be helping another working mum find this resource too. Thanks so much for listening.